Today, I would like to follow up a book that we have done recently. We published a book about 3 weeks ago with Vladimir Popov, and the title of the book is Mapping a New World Order, the Rest Beyond the West. The Rest Beyond the West. It's not to follow the cliche that the world is divided and the East is fighting with the West. So there's not the West versus the rest. It's beyond the West. But I will leave this book is already available, so I will not summarize this book, but I would like to do something else. Based on this book, I would like to make a next step and try with you to understand the main contradictions that we were discussing in this book, which will lead to a new dimension of the New World Order. But first, before we will start, I would like to ask you, and rather ladies, I would like to ask ladies a fundamental question. Can I take my jacket off?
Of course.
Thank you. Because, Canadian experience is that we have, and Kyle is here, that in our rooms the temperature is about 17 degrees to preserve meat better. And here is very warm. Very well. A note on methodology, which can be a new paper for publication. It's pretty simple methodology based on Georg Hegel's dialectical method of inquiry or social analysis, the action, reaction, and synthesis. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Idea is not new. Hegel proposed this, and it was developed by Joachim Fichte to the point of practical implementation in the social inquiry. And that is my method for this presentation. I would like to show you the process, anti-process, and then the synthesis that may come out of this complex interaction between two contradictory processes. That's my methodological note for today's meeting. And obviously, the second note is that my title of this presentation is, Daria, what is the title of this presentation?
Contradictions of the world system and
its
future.
System. So you probably are intrigued what one can say about the future. In this book, we tried to make an attempt to show that there are several processes that are new to the current world order, which are related to the way and mechanism for development. But I will go beyond that. And I cannot claim that I know the future. I cannot claim that I can predict the future, not at all. It's much more humble task to show those contradictions that probably will create new reality. So out of these contradictions, certain synthesis is already coming, and we know about the contours of what's coming based on those contradictions. So I cannot tell you whether or not the value of the dollar will be at 60 rubles or 65 rubles, but I can tell you based on this type of analysis that the dollar will be not higher than it is right now. So that's how I would like to proceed with today's presentation. First contradiction that comes to mind is a fundamental one. This is hegemony versus multipolarity contradiction. The future will be somehow formed by the end of this struggle. Multipolarity is probably not the best term, but hegemony is the proper term. It's the system is changing because of this contradiction. On one side, US and allies, and on the other side, the others. And the hegemon would like to maintain its hegemony, which is obvious. It's not, I am not saying that it's morally wrong or ethically wrong. Always the hegemon would like to keep hegemony in order to secure for citizens better conditions of life and clearer future and better stability. So for me, the hegemon or hegemony is not morally or ethically wrong. The problem is that having a hegemony is almost impossible in current global order. And therefore, the hegemony is fighting with multipolarity, represented by the others. So clearly that pair, we versus others, will shape the next years of the world order. So if you see this struggle, you see clearly a pair of US plus European Union versus Chinese economic challenges. As you know, China last year, GDP of China reached the level of US. It doesn't tell you about the quality of life in China or quality of life in US, but definitely this became the final signal, very warning signal to US and allies that something is going on here. And the Chinese reach for the first time, and probably this year, will have a GDP higher than US. This is one contradiction, but another is the contradiction or the challenge coming from Russia and Russian allies in security area. For the first time, Syria have shown that US and allies, they do not have a security monopoly or security umbrella monopoly in any part of the world. So if the Russians can do it in Syria, probably they can do it in other parts of the world. So the signal was pretty strong. The monopoly to security is broken. And something has to be done about that from the perspective of the hegemon. So therefore, the hegemon is trying to maintain its power. And therefore, the Chinese-US relations will be rather sour because of these fundamental contradictions. It's not about the personal relations as well with Russia. It's not about Putin any longer. It's about Russian position in the world security structure. And therefore, relation between US and Russia will be also sour for the years to come. If the situation will not change in a sense that Russia will subordinate to the hegemon, which is probably not going to happen for next 10 years or 8 to 10 years. So how the hegemon is reacting? The hegemon is reacting in the forms of inventing new tools, absolutely new tools, which were not known as yet in order to maintain its hegemony. And the network of agreements that are negotiated for the last 6 to 10 years by now are coming to center fruition. It's the so-called T-Trinity Treaty, or T-Treaty Trinity, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, 12 countries, and TISA, T-I-C-A, Trade in Services Agreement, not known for many, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with Europe. Trump is trying to block some of those, but in fact the negotiations are going on. They would like to have a different position, better position within those agreements, but the negotiations are continuing, and I think that even you will see during the Trump administration certain progress in these areas. What is it all about? This is about capturing key positions, using institutional and normative framework to maintain hegemonic position of United States and Europe. Interesting. If this is going to come to fruition, this will capture 2/3 of the global GDP. 2/3 of the global GDP will be under those agreements. It means that for the years to come, the different type of hegemony, not military, not even economic, will be coming to create a new world order. It means it is interesting that in neither of those agreements China is presented. Russia is not also included. Not only that, BRIC countries are excluded from those agreements. It's a serious signal. We versus us. And until you will not be subordinated to our rules of the game, you are excluded from those crucial normative and institutional frameworks that will shape the future. So at one point, or if you have a statistical picture, you see the interesting picture of the world economy. There is certain level of convergence. And this is the book about this type of convergence. There is a visible economic convergence between the systems. US-dominated system and US not dominated system. But this convergence is a dangerous thing for the hegemon. And therefore, they will try to maintain the hegemony and subordinate the process for their own benefits. Again, it's not morally wrong or ethically wrong. This is the signal that we are entering a period of the deep structural economic contradictions in which the process will create more not only economic but political and social tensions, and about those I will be talking about in a moment. So obviously this will be following by the different type of subordination, which is the media subordination, which is the information subordination. As you know, and I live with Kyle in the country which is close to United States of America, and we watch very carefully what's going on there because we very much depend on America. Almost 90% of our trade goes there. Every day, $980 million of trade crossing our borders. $1 billion a day is phenomenal trade. And we see that in our media there are phenomenal changes in US media in particular, in which the media is positioning themselves not as a deliverer of information, but media are positioning themselves as a political broker between the systems. So it's not about the facts any longer. It's about the legitimization of the other. So the facts are not longer important. What is important that the media is playing an active role in repositioning the structural struggle of the world. So there are bad guys and good guys. And no matter what the facts are, they are presented as such. And the media is losing its objectivity in our eyes, in front of our eyes, and they are part of this hegemonic struggle, hegemony versus multipolarity. So that's the first contradiction that will shape our future. The second contradiction that are shaping our future is globalization or universalization versus identity politics, or autonomization of identities, which will lead later on to the radicalization of identities. I would like to stop for a moment on those, on this contradiction. One of the main characteristics of globalization, as we all know, is universalization of norms, culture, behavior, institution, system of management, and commodification of social relations, or the uniformization or universalization goes through the commodification of social relations. So the main idea of globalization is to make the economic system going smoother, working better, more efficient, but universalization of behavior and norms. It's obviously much simpler to have one pattern instead of dealing with the 10 patterns. It's much simpler to have one solution instead of dealing with the 10 solutions. It's not economically effective. So therefore, universalization is one of the key elements of current stage of globalization. As Karl Polanyi was warning us many years ago. But at the same time, people do not like to lose their own identity, their own culture, their own customs, their own religion, their own history. Just therefore, the reaction to universalization is politics of identity. And politics of identity is emerging in different new forms. Religious forms, this gender aspect, in the very serious gender aspect, is ethnic aspect. It is based on religion, it is based on locality in which you live, and so on and so forth. It's not new. As you know, one of the Iranian leader, Khatami, started this process by saying that, well, we don't need universalization, we need a dialogue among different civilizations. So the dialogue of civilization initiated by Khatami then was blocked by the events with the Iranian hostilities between Iran and United States. But otherwise, this is not a new process. This process is going on, but we are entering a new stage of this process in which the politics become very much a function, or politics become dependent on identity. Politics more and more reacts to identity struggle, to class struggle, to cultural struggle, to many other forms of identity, and politics is now becoming based on identity groups. So you see this mushrooming identity groups pressing on the state to deliver what they think is their own right. So we have groups or parties, political parties or social movements based on culture, on religion, on dialect, on disability, on education, on ethnicity, on language, on nationality, on sex, on occupation, profession, race, and so on and so forth, or sexual orientation. In other words, is that new identity politics instead of the larger socially based interest groups is emerging. And they are becoming narrower and narrower and narrower. And since the state cannot react to every identity group interests, therefore they are radicalizing. If I cannot get what I want, I should be more vocal. If I don't get what I want, I should be more radical, because then the state will listen, and then the state will react. And this goes globally. And the classical case is terrorism. If I cannot achieve what I want by other means, I am using terror as the most radical means of turning your attention to my problems. Therefore, the next big struggle is identity politics and universalization, which will have consequences for the state policies and state behavior. The weaker the state is more prone to react to identity politics. And the states are weaker. And therefore, the identity politics is becoming the politics of the day. The state is not longer reacting to the social needs. The state is reacting to the needs of identity groups, which changing the whole dimension of state to citizen reaction. Obviously, it will lead to more social protests, because the more radical you are, the more visible you are. It will lead to the disbalances between the state and the interest groups. Classical case are pensioner identity groups globally. They are not forming only the national branches of political parties. They are now linked globally. And the result is that we are paying more attention to pensioners than to our children. If you look at the European Union statistics, you will see one interesting thing which we were trying to find out with my economic colleagues from the economic department, that right now in economic union, the social spending is lower every year, with the exception of the pensioners. So the children are getting less for the healthcare, and the pensioners are getting more for the healthcare every year in European Union. This is the trend, very dangerous trend. But what to do? This is the reaction to the identity politics based on very well oiled political machine of the pensioner movements everywhere. This is the second main contradiction that will shape the future of the system. The third contradiction, to me, is very obvious, or much more obvious, is the wealth versus poverty contradiction. Wealth versus poverty contradiction. Some basic facts, and probably you know them better than I do, but before we will start the analysis, some basic facts from the World Bank. We estimate that about 7.4 billion people are living on the planet, and 1.1 billion, according to World Bank, living below the poverty level, which is estimated as $1.25 per day. And about another 2.5 billion people are living for less than $2.5 a day. Means that about 40% of our planet is living below the poverty level. It will be shocking for you, but our own Canadian statistics says that about 350,000 children, Canadian children, are going to primary schools hungry, without enough food. Shocking. Canada, one of the richest countries in the world. I can continue with these statistics, but what is the point? The point here is that, shown in the book by Thomas Piketty, a French economist, in his book Capital in 21st Century, his main point in this book is that capital tends to reproduce itself. It's nothing new. Marx also was talking about this. But he is showing that there is a certain oligarchization of capital. Means that inherited capital has a tendency to grow exponentially at the expense of other social groups. And this is the novelty of his book, which is followed by the Oxfam report from 2017, which was prepared for Davos, for conference in Davos. And this is a very interesting report which shows that 8 people in the world are having or controlling wealth which is equal to 3.6 billion people. So 8 people are controlling wealth of about half of the globe. This is shocking, but not shocking in the moral terms or ethical terms. The shocking are consequences of this process. What are the consequences of this process of increasing inequality? First, it's the influence on democracy. Usually we thought that one vote is one person. Now it's increasingly clear that this democratic theater is changing into $1, one vote. We were witnessing 2 the most expensive elections in the history of mankind in United States and almost elsewhere. The conclusion is that as Jonathan Nitzan and Shimshon Bichler have shown in the wonderful book Capital is Power, which was published 3 or 4 years ago, that capital is becoming a political power. Also nothing new, but they put a lot of economic evidence to show how there is a direct link between capital and political power. So this is the first point. The second point is that super rich are avoiding taxes because they are capable of putting their profits in tax havens. That is important because the paying taxes is important to maintain certain social stability in countries that will turn those taxes into social benefits and security. If you are not paying taxes, means that inevitably those aspects of the state protection will be diminished. Thirdly, they are globally controlling the labor market. And the labor market consequence is that we have a huge struggle to have a minimum salary, minimum payment per hour in most of the countries, including North America. You probably know that 300 million people are without the so-called minimum payment guarantee. So there is a manipulation of wages in global scale, not only manipulation of politics. And the other consequences, I can talk about this, but to sum it up, this section is that if you are commodifying democracy, means if there is a process of commodification of democracy, it will lead to the end of the myth in which we live, the end of the myth of liberal order. This is dangerous. For me, personally, it's very dangerous because I live in this myth of at least myth having some influence over the politics, participating in politics, and the myth that my vote means something. But this myth is coming to an end. If we'll continue with such huge inequalities and consequences of these inequalities, will end up this fundamental myth on which the Western society is based. In other words, we are losing trust in the system. If we're losing trust in the system, plus identity politics, plus hegemony struggle, you see what is going to come. That will lead me, the issue of trust will lead me to another point, which is the fourth contradiction, which is contradiction between the state and the market. Old contradiction. And here the main point is that there is a sinusoidal type approach of economists and politicians towards the key problem, how the state and market are cooperating or not cooperating, or what's supposed to be relation between state and the market, whether state should lead development or the market should be responsible for development. In other words, whether the state is supposed to be in charge of our well-being or the market will create conditions for our well-being. And this contradiction is sinusoidal because sometimes there are those who say in the Keynesian way, yes, the state should lead the market, this 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and so on and so forth. Biggest projects like socialist is based on this idea, and fascist is based on the same idea of state leading the market, and then you have the 1970s and 1980s, in which the neoliberal order, economic order, is starting to dominate, and therefore the market is to be the main stimulus for development or wealth. But neither worked. Neither worked. And the crisis 2007-2008 has shown that neither market nor the state alone can deliver what they are promising. Therefore, we lost the trust in both the state and in the market. If we have lost the trust in the state and in the market, means that we trust no one. I, as a citizen, lost the trust in both the market and the system by losing 1/3 of my pension system in Canada between 2007 and 2010. I cannot trust the banks because, as you know, the banks are now paying huge fines for manipulating the market during the crisis. They already by today paid about $6 billion altogether of fines for their bad behavior during those 3 years. If I cannot trust the banks, whom I trust? Which leads us to the point that entrepreneurs themselves are losing the trust in their own system. If this is the case, and our book is showing quite well that we are entering, I don't like to go too much to that, but our book is showing that probably the solution for the future is a very dual system, parallel system, state and market, in which the state plays the role of the corporate insurance company for the nascent productive forces and helping them in order to maintain their market position withstanding competition. But this is not the same as an import substitution strategy, because the import substitution strategy means that the state is helping the market indefinitely. What is going on to happen is the state will, based on the comparative advantage of certain sections of the industry, help those industries until they become the leaders, the worldwide leaders, to compete. This is the Chinese case, this is the Taiwanese case, this is the Singapore case, this is the Malaysian case, this is North Korean case. North Korean, South Korean case. But there is no longer market, no longer debate between market and the state. There is the debate about how deep and which way those two should cooperate in order to maintain the market share in the global scale, at the national level. The problem is different. The problem is that if we would like that state will cooperate with the market, we need the state to be relatively strong, and this is not the case. The state cannot withstand the pressure of globalization. They are becoming weaker and weaker, and then this wave of neoliberalism led to privatization of many state services. If you privatize so many state services, what is the state role in protecting our interests as citizens? Nothing. Almost nothing. And if the state cannot protect the interests of the citizens, then the state apparatus is no longer needed. Why do we need the political parties? Why do we need parliaments if they cannot produce politics? Politics means having or elaborating the choices that should be made by power. And the power is for taking those political choices and implementing in form of the politics, in form of policies. So if we don't have this, why do we need parliaments? Why do we need those political parties? Then the question is, why do we need the system as it is right now? So see that, this debate between market and state is not only about economic forces. It's about the shape of the future of our political system. So the consequences are much more dire than we think, because we are being transformed into consumers. The last 20 years were a phenomenal boom for capital forces. Everyone was earning a lot of money. And we were earning also. We were living in the privilege of having cheap commodities, thanks to the huge competition. But we are transformed into consumers. We are no longer needed for the market as citizens, because as citizens we would like to make our own choices, not impose on us. And the problem is that these two processes are not compatible. The more we are consumers, the less we are citizens. And the last probably contradiction that I would like briefly to discuss, which follow up this, the previous one, is power versus politics. Power versus politics. The idea is here, it's that power is in process of being separated from politics. What is power? Power is the ability to fix things. Power is the ability to deliver. Power is the ability to make things happen. What is politics? Politics is the process in which you are selecting the choices for the power to implement. So politics is about whether we need a school or swimming pool, whether we need more spending on our army or more spending on our schools or hospitals. This is a politics about. And then via parliament process and democratic processes or less democratic processes, we are transferring those needs to those in power, and the power is trying to implement it in some ways. So there is a link between politics and power. Politics is first, power comes later. And there is a monopoly of state using certain types of power. But now we see that this system, which is obvious to us, we live through this system, is collapsing because there is less and less power in the process, in the hands of the state, because of privatization, because of globalization. The certain prerogatives of the state are located somewhere else. The money is located somewhere else. Therefore, the power is located outside the national state. So the role of the state is changing, but then the state cannot cooperate with the market the way the market would expect this from the state. So therefore the market is more dependent on the external forces outside the national state than depend on the forces which are located in the national state. And therefore the power and politics are separating, almost to the point that they are forming two independent, or they are living two independent lives. What does it mean in practice? In practice means that those politicians and those machines of the state are living more autonomously than before. They are creating a shell in which they are somehow living their own small lives, which are very much detached from what we would like them to be doing. The shell is living their own small story, immune from almost all of us. I call it autonomization of politics. And you see that everywhere, not only in the United States, but also in Russia, also in European Union. When you are asking the question to the politician, why you do that? This is not wise, this is not rational. The answer is, because I can. Because I can. That's the answer. I should admit that it was my response to my child, which was the stupid response. When he was asking, why you are doing this to me? I said, because I can. And I never thought that this will be the case of the state. But it is. It was stupid, and I apologize for that. But I am not sure whether the state will apologize to me for what the state is doing to me. Rather not. If there is autonomization of state, usually it's the process is very simple, and there is an economics, there are people, the people are saying something, market is saying something, the state is following somehow. No longer the case. The state is creating its own reality. So if Madame Merkel was saying that Mr. Putin is living in his own reality, but Madame Merkel, yes, it's true. Mr. Putin is creating his own reality because he can. And Madame Merkel is creating her own reality because she can. And the Trump is creating his own reality because he can. Marcon's problem is that he cannot create his own reality. And Renzi was not able to create his own reality because he was too weak. Because the Italian state was too weak. So again, you see the process of autonomization of politics, which may lead to a very interesting political consequences. Because the wars, conflicts, will not depend on so-called national interests. They will depend on the autonomous decision of the leadership. This creates, and my conclusion is that what we did with Professor Kazarinova, we wrote an article for Polis which is called Fear as Politics. Strach как политика. Fear as politics. Not politics of fear, but fear as politics. And this is published in the latest journal Polis, in which 8 or something, but the summer issue of Polis. So my conclusion is that obviously every one of us who has a little brain are coming to the conclusion that these contradictions are scaring. They create fear in all of us, but not only in all of us. Let's create the fear in elites. Elites are worried. They do not know what will be tomorrow. The leadership is worried because they do not know what will be tomorrow. Therefore, the autonomization and so on and so forth, they're trying to immune us from that. But the fear is overwhelming, and the fear, it's not the part of the politics in the traditional way, that we were scaring our societies with someone, with others, with blacks, with whites, with yellows, with colorful and so on and so forth. It's no longer the case. The fear is becoming politics. It's integral part of the political process. Most of our policies are based not on rational calculation or on our interests. They are based on fear. Look at the Poland or Hungary and the migration policies. Nothing rational in that. They are based on fear of immigrants, fear of others. So they are implementing state policies which were based not on rational behavior, calculation, European solidarity or whatever. That is based purely on fear. And you have these policies enacted in the budget, in education, in health, and so on and so forth. They fear that if they will do not do something, that will be social overreaction to something. Or they fear that they are not in control and they would like to impose the hard shell on the soft yoke. And that's how the state is looks like right now. All over the place. We did the comparative studies with Professor Della Sala from Italy, and we observed something which is disturbing, that democratic and not democratic states are becoming almost the same. They look the same. Because of the processes I described, they look like egg with a hard shell and a very soft yolk inside. And the harder the shell, the softer the yolk. They are trying to present themselves as a powerful, fearful, strong. In fact, they are very weak. So that is a conclusion. I cannot predict the future. I have shown you processes that will lead to certain changes, but the contours of the future. There is a late Professor Bauman, a wonderful sociologist, who developed the idea of the interregnum, means something in between, and he died this year. And I was with him in the good relations intellectually, but in the last months we were debating. I didn't agree with him in many ways. First of all, I didn't agree with him any longer about the idea of the interregnum, something in between, that the old is dying and the new is not yet clear. My position was that the old is dying and the new is already there, is already here, is already with us. So the contours of the future are known. The problem is that we don't know details. That's the only thing. But the contours, the shell in which our intellectual framework can be framed, is already known. So with this conclusion, I would like to thank you very much for your patience.